This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Saturday. That makes it time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We are in the early going of a brand new limited format, Duskmourn, and we don't have enough data right now to really drill down to individual cards and talk about them in any sort of detail just yet. So as usual, this first video I'm doing before we have like a critical mass of data to talk about is sort of a broad strokes, early takeaways video where I talk about how I'm feeling about the format. And I would say overall, the way things have panned out in terms of like what mechanics are good, what decks are good, most of it has come out the way I expected it to, which is not usually what happens. That said, I do think there are a lot of individual cards, including some important commons, that I missed pretty hard on. So I think I may have done well broadly, but I think when we look at the cards I got wrong, we're going to see that there's some pretty bad ones that I got wrong. But for today, we're going to talk about the broad strokes. So I'm going to look pretty good in this particular video. So I want to start with the mechanic I was most excited about and most interested in going into the format, and that is Manifest Dread. Overall, that mechanic has proven to be strong. I thought it would be going into this set, mostly because like this is a graveyard set, and you can look at all of these 2/2s that are generated by Manifest Dread cards as 2/2s with upside. So like all the cards where I said, you know, if this just made a 2/2 token, it'd be good. All of them are really good. All of them have turned out to be as good as I expected because Manifest Dread just has so much little stuff going on. You know, helps you load your graveyard for Delirium or for other purposes if you're like in Black-White Reanimator. That's one of the nice little synergy points they gave us. And additionally, frequently you have a face-down 2/2 and you turn it into something real at instant speed. It can be a real pain dealing with manifest creatures, but they're also pretty good when you're the one who's using them. It is true, I would say overall, like, you end up with a creature under a manifest from a Manifest Dread, like, I don't know, 15 or 20% less than I expected. Like, I kind of saw it happening more. And I did have some bad luck early in the format in a couple of the early access drafts where it seemed like I could never hit a creature. But since then, I have been hitting creatures with regularity, and oftentimes, you know, it can be really sweet, actually, with some of the smaller creatures, like the 1-mana 1/1 artifact creature with haste. Sometimes just turning that face up for 1 when your opponent points removal at it or when you block with it or something, like, that ends up being pretty good value because you end up drawing a card your opponent didn't know you were going to draw. So they're just like way better 2/2 tokens that help you load your graveyard and have this upside where they can do other stuff. And, you know, that's kind of what I said in the set review, and it's panned out. I think blue-green is in like the top half of the color pairs in the format. I think the blue-green Manifest Dread deck is pretty good. The common Manifest Dread that, you know, manifests Dread, it's probably been better than I expected it to be. It's just a 2-mana 2/2 with real upside. So, Manifest Dread, the mechanic, and the color pair, blue-green, have done what I expected them to do overall. On the flip side of that, going in, I didn't think blue-red was going to be very good for a variety of reasons. I thought it would be a little bit awkward to try to play with a bunch of doors because some of them don't add to the board. And I thought building like a full-blown door deck would be a really bad idea. In some ways I was right about this, and in some ways I was wrong. I would say overall the blue-red deck is bad. It comes out bad the vast majority of the time when you play it. However, there is like a very real build-around element to it. Namely, if you end up with the Signpost uncommon, the one that is door on each side, you know, it gives you mana for a door on one side and it makes a creature on the other side. If you can get like 2 of those, or even 1 sometimes, you end up with a pretty good deck. Now, the problem is that deck reminds me a lot of back in Dominaria United, you had the Defender deck, where you like had to get the 4-mana 1/3 with Defender that makes a 1/1 for each Defender in play, and then makes an additional 1/1 flyer when you play them. Like, you had to have that for that deck to work, and that was okay because that wasn't a whole archetype. For blue-red, you basically need to end up with that Signpost uncommon as a build-around to make it work. There are enough doors in blue-red that do add to the board, and I would say overall that was another one of my big feelings about the set was If a door has one side that can add to the board, it's going to be solid or better. And if it doesn't, it's going to be bad. And, that is somewhat obvious given what limited formats have looked like so far. But that's proven to be even more true than I expected, I guess. I've seen people try to play those doors that don't really do anything on either side, and it doesn't go well for them most of the time. But as long as you've got one side that does something, adds a body to the board, it almost feels like you free roll the other side. It's not an insane card, but Ticket Booth is a perfectly solid little card that's a 3-mana, 2/2 manifest on one side, and then later in the game you can just give double strike to stuff, and so you end up with, kind of a below rate creature to start with, but you end up getting this additional free value late. So those kinds of doors, in all the colors, if you have doors that add a body to the board, remove a creature, add counters to the board, anything that actually does something, basically, those doors have been good. And the ones that have two sides that don't add to the board, like the green one that makes all your lands tap for mana of any color, and has a 4-mana mill 4, put 2 cards back in your hand on the other side, those ones aren't good. So that has sort of panned out the way I expected. Doors overall and the idea of a door deck isn't a great idea, with the exception of if you get your hands on Smoky Lounge, you can end up with a real deck. But you really have to have it, and that makes going into the deck kind of dangerous. Like I said, it's way too build-aroundy to be an entire archetype. It's not like that Defender. It shouldn't be like that Defender deck, but that's how it's felt to me so far. I've seen people pull it off. I've pulled it off. But you've got to have that card because it gives you a real win condition and a real advantage in terms of all your other doors. Most of the other door payoffs just aren't good either, which is problematic. And I didn't really expect them to be the 4-mana 3/3 flyer that when it hits your opponent unlocks a door. Those things haven't really worked, and that's part of the problem too, and that's why you have to have Smoky Lounge, Misty Salon, and when you do get that going, it's pretty legit. So, to talk about another one of the mechanics and how it's panned out, there's Delirium, and the 2 Delirium decks, I think, are 2 of the better decks in the format. I don't think they're the best decks, and those decks are Red-Green and Black-Green. Those are the 2, straight-up Delirium decks. I think Blue-White and Red-White have sort of come out as the best decks in the format so far that make the most consistent, really good decks, and one of those is an enchantment deck, and the other one's just kind of an aggro deck. But I think the Delirium decks, the 2 of them, Black-Green and Red-Green, have both been really good. It's, going into the set, I thought it would be pretty easy, reasonable to get Delirium going, and because they gave us so many enchantment creatures and artifact creatures in both colors, they made sure to seed the format with a bunch of those. And it's really not that hard between Manifest Dread, which I've already mentioned, discard effects, self-mill. You've got a lot of these effects attached to cards that are, add to the board. And you can quickly load your graveyard, get Delirium. You do need to be, keeping an eye on the mix of card types you have in your deck to hit it consistently. But you don't even necessarily need 6 card types in your deck to pull it off. I've had a few decks where I had 1 sorcery or something. And, I could still get Delirium because there's land, enchantment, creature, and artifact, right? And that's not even everything, but, those are some of the more common card types. And it's not hard to get them in your graveyard. You can get them there pretty easily. And the red-green deck can be kind of aggressive, and sometimes you're looking up on turn 4, and your hands that feed, which are the 2-mana 2/2s that get +2/+0 and Menace when you've got Delirium going, and they're attacking for 4 damage, So, yeah, getting Delirium is very doable. You have those cards accessing their full upside, maybe even a little more often than I expected going into the format. And Red-Green and Black-Green have both been pretty legit decks. So, like I mentioned before, I do think the 2 best decks in the format, how they performed, how I've seen them perform so far, and what little data we do have, seems to support the idea that white's a pretty good color, and in particular, blue-white and red-white are both really strong. The bad news about that is those are both generally pretty aggressive decks. Blue-white's sort of a tempo thing, and red-white is, 2 power or less aggro. There are lots of really good cards to support those strategies, cards with powerful eerie triggers. Going into the set, I thought Optimistic Scavenger might be the best uncommon in the set, and it's pretty close. You know, if it's played on turn one, games are usually completely out of reach in a hurry. Those kinds of cards just create so much of an advantage for such a little mana investment. Then you have things like Sheltered by Ghosts, which is another insane uncommon. One I gave a pretty high grade to in the set review. If anything, I underrated it. I think I gave it a B minus. It's maybe a B plus is as good as it has been. I mean, you know, it's easy to think about the times where it goes wrong, but those don't happen as much as you'd think. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's an Oblivion Ring-like effect where you stick it on your creature. You know, it's an aura that buffs your creature. So that does mean it's easier for your opponent to get rid of the aura because they can do it with creature removal. But the addition of Ward makes a big difference, and so does Lifelink. Like, even if they do eventually kill the thing, they have to spend a bunch of mana to do it, and you've probably gained a significant amount of life while taking a creature away from them for that entire time. So, you know, these cards that add to the board while taking away from the opponents, like Sheltered by Ghosts, have been really strong. You know, Ethereal Armor has been legit, you know, and that's a good mark of aggro decks being good, is you can just slam an Ethereal Armor on your creature and just attack them with huge buffed creatures because you have a bunch of enchantments. So yeah, overall, white's a good color, and the aggressive white decks, the ones, you know, that can use combat tricks, you know, which are yet again good. There aren't as many good ones in this set. Like, we had way too many of them in Bloomburrow. In this set, you know, you have to contend with Jump Scare, and there's two 1-mana ones that are good. The Jump Scare, which is 1 white mana, and then the 1 red mana one that gives +3/+0, and Manifest. Like, those are both really annoying. We've got good tricks that we have to deal with again. And that is part of what makes like red-white such a good deck. Doesn't hurt that both Signpost Uncommons and red-white have both been really good. And the same is true in blue-white. Like, you know, that often is a pretty good indicator of just how good a color pair can be. You know, blue-green too has maybe the best pair of Signpost Uncommons. Like, those two are just insane, and that deck has also been really good. So overall, the big takeaways here are that Manifest Dread is good. Almost every card that says Manifest Dread on it that is reasonably costed is good. It's solid or better in the format. Same is true, though, to a lesser extent with Delirium. There are some mediocre Delirium payoffs out there, but most of them are good, and you're going to get Delirium going in a deck like red-green or black-green, and it's really not that hard. Blue-red mostly doesn't work, but if you can get the Smoky Lounge situation going, you can have a pretty good build-around deck that is a legitimate archetype in the format. It's just a bit of a bummer that that's like one of the core 10 core color pairs, but at least it can work, I guess, is the good news about it. Rooms need to affect the board to be good. That's almost always going to be the case. If they don't, they're usually bad, so don't play those for the most part. And white is really good. It has a lot of really good uncommons and commons, many of the ones that I talked about here. And most of the decks that are white, and especially blue-white and red-white, are very potent, aggressive decks. So those are my big takeaways for now. Like I said, next week there are some cards that I really need to talk about that I was way wrong about in the set review. Blue is an area where I think I did especially poorly, you know, just a little preview. Unable to Scream is a card I gave a D to, and it's probably Blue's best comment, or at least in the conversation for it. So that's one of, you know, like I said, broad strokes, I think I did a good job with this set, but there are some individual cards that I do really need to talk about next week once we have some data so I can really more definitively say this card is good, period, you know. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.